The sound of shattering glass echoed through the upscale bakery. As Keisha Brown watched her 7-year-old son, Marcus's face, crumble along with her heart. The custom birthday cake, a superhero masterpiece that had taken 3 weeks of overtime shifts to afford, lay destroyed on the marble floor, victim of a careless employee's accident. "I'm so sorry, ma'am, but we don't have time to remake it before tomorrow," the manager said dismissively, already turning away. "Your deposit is non-refundable." Marcus tugged at her uniform, his big brown eyes brimming with tears he was trying so hard not to shed. "It's okay, Mama, I don't need a cake." But it wasn't okay. Nothing about their life was okay. And as Keisha stood there, watching her brave little boy pretend his heart wasn't breaking, she didn't know that across the street, a man in an expensive black suit had witnessed everything through the window and was about to change their lives forever. Jin Kang had built an empire on reading people's weaknesses, but something about the woman's quiet dignity and the child's heartbreaking acceptance made him feel something he'd forgotten existed, the need to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves. Note: welcome to Korean Mafia lovers. Hello everyone. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button. Your support is essential for us to continue bringing you these stories. Keisha Brown had exactly 17 minutes to get from the diner to Marcus's school, pick him up, and make it to the bakery before they closed. Her sneakers squeaked against the rain-soaked pavement as she hurried down the busy Chicago street, her server's apron still tied around her waist, smelling of coffee and exhaustion. The double shift at Murphy's diner had been brutal, but the extra tips meant she could finally afford the superhero cake Marcus had been dreaming about for months. At 7 years old, he'd never had a real birthday party, just the two of them sharing a grocery store cupcake in their tiny apartment. This year would be different. This year she'd make sure he felt special. "Mama." Marcus's voice cut through her thoughts as she spotted him waiting by the school gate, his backpack almost as big as he was. His face lit up when he saw her, and despite her exhaustion, Keisha felt her heart warm. He was her everything, her reason for working 3 jobs, for pushing through when every bone in her body ached, for believing tomorrow could be better than today. "Hey, baby. Ready to see your cake?" she asked, taking his small hand in hers. "Really? We're really going to see it?" His excitement was infectious, and Keisha squeezed his hand gently. "Really? And tomorrow, you're going to have the best 8th birthday ever." As they walked toward the bakery, Marcus chatted about his day, about the kids in his class who were coming to his party, all 3 of them, and about how he'd told his teacher about the superhero cake. Keisha listened, filing away every detail, every moment of his happiness to remember later when the bills came due and the worry crept back in. The bakery sat on the corner of an upscale shopping district, its windows gleaming with displays of elaborate wedding cakes and artisanal pastries. Keisha had saved for 3 months to afford their services, working extra shifts until her feet bled in her worn-out shoes. But Marcus deserved beautiful things, even if she couldn't afford them. Inside, the bakery smelled like vanilla and dreams. Marcus pressed his nose against the display case, his breath fogging the glass as he pointed at different treats. "Look, Mama, they have cookies shaped like stars. Mr. Brown's cake should be ready," Keisha told the young employee behind the counter, her voice carrying a note of pride. She'd never been able to order something custom before, never been able to walk into a place like this and claim something beautiful as theirs. The employee disappeared into the back, and Keisha watched Marcus explore, his wonder making her chest tight with love and determination. This was why she worked so hard, for moments like this, for the chance to give him magic in a world that had given them so little. When the employee returned, he was carrying a large white box, and Keisha's heart soared. "Here we go," he said, setting it on the counter. "One superhero birthday cake for—" The box slipped from his hands. Time seemed to slow as Keisha watched 3 weeks of overtime shifts, 3 months of careful saving, and her son's dreams crashed to the marble floor. The custom cake, a masterpiece of blue and red fondant with Marcus's favorite superheroes, shattered into pieces, frosting and cake mixing with the debris of broken dreams. "Oh no," the employee said, his face pale. "I'm so sorry, Mama?" Marcus's small voice was barely a whisper. Keisha knelt beside the destroyed cake, her hands shaking as she tried to salvage something, anything, but it was ruined, completely ruined. The manager appeared, took one look at the mess, and shook his head. "I'm sorry." "Ma'am, but we don't have time to remake it before tomorrow. Your deposit is non-refundable." The words hit her like a physical blow. That deposit had been her grocery money for the week. The cake had been everything she could afford and more. And now. "It's okay, Mama," Marcus said again, his little hand touching her shoulder. "I don't really need a cake. We can just have ice cream." But Keisha could see the tears he was holding back, could see the way his shoulders slumped with disappointment he was trying so hard to hide. Her brave, beautiful boy, who never complained, who never asked for anything, who always tried to make her feel better when life knocked them down again. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady, and took Marcus's hand. "Come on, baby. Let's go home." As they walked out of the bakery, Keisha felt the familiar weight of failure settling on her shoulders. She'd promised him something special, and she'd failed. Again. Just like she'd failed to give him a father, failed to give him a stable home, failed to be enough. Across the street, Jin Kang lowered his phone, having witnessed the entire scene through the bakery's large windows. He'd been waiting for his associate to finish a meeting in the building above, when the drama unfolded below. Something about the woman's quiet dignity in the face of disappointment, about the child's heartbreaking maturity, stirred something in his chest he'd thought long dead. He'd built his empire on calculated moves, on reading weakness and exploiting it. But this wasn't weakness he was seeing. This was strength in its purest form. A mother trying to give her child a moment of magic in a world that seemed determined to deny them both. Jin made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Yuki, I need you to handle something for me tonight." The next morning, Keisha woke to the sound of Marcus singing softly in the kitchen. She'd barely slept, her mind churning with ways to salvage his birthday. Maybe she could make a cake from a box mix, decorate it with the few superhero toys she'd managed to buy secondhand. It wouldn't be the same, but maybe. "Mama, Mama, come quick." Marcus's voice was filled with excitement, not disappointment, and Keisha hurried to the kitchen, her heart racing. Their tiny apartment's front door was open, and Marcus was standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with wonder. "Look!" On their doorstep sat the most beautiful birthday cake Keisha had ever seen. Not just a superhero cake. This was a masterpiece that made the bakery's version look amateur. 3 tiers of perfection, with handcrafted figurines of every superhero Marcus had ever mentioned, complete with LED lights that made the whole creation glow like something from a dream. But that wasn't all. Beside the cake were wrapped presents, not cheap toys, but high-quality items that Keisha recognized from Marcus's wish list, things she'd seen him stare at longingly in store windows. A new backpack, art supplies, books, and a tablet for his schoolwork. "Is this real?" Marcus whispered, his voice full of awe. Keisha knelt beside the gifts, her hands shaking as she searched for a card, an explanation, anything. Finally, she found a small envelope tucked beneath the cake box. Inside, in elegant handwriting, was a simple note. "Every child deserves magic on their birthday. Happy 8th birthday, Marcus. A friend." "Mama, who sent this?" Marcus asked, his small hands hovering over the gifts as if he was afraid they might disappear. Keisha had no answer. In their neighborhood, miracles didn't happen. People struggled to take care of their own. No one had the resources to play fairy godmother to a stranger's child. But here it was, impossible and real, sitting on their doorstep like something from a story. "I don't know, baby," she said softly, "but someone wanted to make your birthday special." The rest of the day passed in a blur of joy. Marcus's 3 friends arrived for the party, their eyes wide with amazement at the cake and decorations that had somehow appeared overnight. Keisha watched her son laugh and play, saw him beam with pride as he showed off his gifts, and felt her heart swell with gratitude toward their mysterious benefactor. But as the children played, Keisha couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Several times, she caught glimpses of a black car parked across the street, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. When she looked directly at it, it would drive away, only to return an hour later. That evening, after the last guest had gone home and Marcus had fallen asleep clutching his new superhero figure, Keisha sat at her kitchen table, staring at the note. The paper was expensive, the handwriting confident and precise. This wasn't a random act of kindness from a neighbor. This was something else entirely. A soft knock at her door made her jump. It was nearly 10 o'clock, and visitors at this hour in their neighborhood usually meant trouble. Keisha approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. A man stood in the hallway, tall and impeccably dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. His face was partially shadowed, but she could see sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed to look right through the door at her. "Miss Brown." His voice was deep, accented with something that sounded Korean. "My name is Jin Kang. I believe we need to talk." Keisha's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd grown up in neighborhoods where men in expensive suits meant danger, meant someone was about to lose something they couldn't afford to lose. But this man had given Marcus the most beautiful birthday of his life. The contradiction made her head spin. "What do you want?" she asked through the door. "To explain," he said simply, "and to offer you something that could change your life." Against every instinct screaming at her to keep the door locked, Keisha found herself turning the deadbolt. Something in his voice, in the careful way he'd phrased his words, made her believe he wasn't here to hurt them. She opened the door just enough to see him clearly, keeping the chain lock engaged. Up close, he was even more striking, Korean features with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with perfectly styled black hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. "You're the one who sent the cake," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am." He didn't try to deny it, didn't offer excuses or explanations, just simple acknowledgement. "Why?" Jin was quiet for a long moment, studying her face through the narrow opening. "Because I know what it's like to watch someone you love go without, and because your son reminded me of someone I used to be." There was something in his voice, a vulnerability that seemed at odds with his expensive clothes and commanding presence. Keisha found herself loosening her grip on the door. "What do you want from us?" she asked. "Nothing," he said, and she almost believed him. Almost. "But I have a proposition that might benefit us both. My grandmother is dying," Jin said quietly, the words stopping Keisha's refusal before it could form. "She's been asking for great-grandchildren, for the sound of a child's laughter in her house. I've been unsuccessful in providing that." Keisha stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. "You want to hire us? To pretend to be your family?" "Not pretend." "Not exactly." Jin's eyes met hers through the gap in the door. "I want to hire you as my son's tutor. Marcus is bright, I can see that. He deserves better schools, better opportunities. In exchange for helping me give my grandmother some peace in her final months, I can give him those opportunities." "Your son?" Keisha's mind reeled. "You have a son?" "I do. He's 8, like Marcus. His name is Kai, and he's—" Jin paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "He's had a difficult time making friends. His mother died when he was young, and he's been raised mostly by nannies and bodyguards. He needs someone who understands what it's like to fight for what you love." The pieces were starting to come together, and Keisha felt a chill run down her spine. Bodyguards, expensive suits, the kind of money that could produce a miracle cake overnight. "What exactly do you do, Mr. Kang?" Jin's smile was sharp and honest. "Nothing you need to worry about, as long as you're under my protection." 3 days later, Keisha found herself standing in front of a mansion in Lincoln Park that looked like something from a movie. The wrought iron gates, the manicured gardens, the house itself, everything screamed wealth and power in a way that made her feel small and out of place. Marcus pressed closer to her side, his new backpack clutched tightly in his hands. "Mama, are you sure we're supposed to be here?" "I'm sure, baby," she said, though her own certainty was wavering. When Jin had given her the address, she'd looked it up online. The house was worth more than she'd make in several lifetimes, situated in one of Chicago's most exclusive neighborhoods. What was she doing here? The front door opened before they could knock, revealing Jin in casual clothes that probably still cost more than her monthly rent. But it was the boy beside him that made Keisha's breath catch. Kai Kang was a beautiful child, with his father's sharp features softened by youth and large solemn eyes that seemed far too old for his 8 years. He stood perfectly straight, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that spoke of rigid training and careful control. "Ms. Brown, Marcus," Jin said formally. "Welcome to our home." Hi, Marcus said shyly, peeking out from behind Keisha's legs. I'm Marcus. Are you Kai? The Korean boy nodded once, precise and controlled. Hello, father says you're going to be my tutor. There was something heartbreaking about the child's formality, the way he called Jin father instead of dad, the careful distance he maintained even from his own parent. Keisha felt her protective instincts flare, not just for Marcus, but for this lonely little boy who clearly had everything except what he needed most. Actually, Keisha said gently, I'm going to be your tutor. Marcus is just going to be your friend, if that's okay with you. For the first time, Kai's perfect composure cracked slightly. Friend? Yeah, Marcus said, his natural warmth breaking through his shyness. Do you like superheroes? I brought my new Captain America figure. We could play together. Kai looked at his father uncertainly, as if asking permission to be a child. Jin's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Go ahead, Kai. Show Marcus your room. As the boys headed upstairs, Marcus chattering excitedly about his birthday party, and Kai listening with fascination, Jin turned to Keisha. Thank you for coming. This is a beautiful home, Keisha said, looking around at the marble floors and crystal chandeliers. But I have to ask, what exactly am I tutoring Kai in? He seems incredibly well educated already. He is. Academically, he's years ahead of his peers. But socially... Jin paused, watching the boys disappear up the grand staircase. He's never had a friend his own age, never played with toys or watched cartoons or done any of the things normal children do. His education has been focused on preparing him for the family business. Which is? Jin's smile was enigmatic. Import and export. Very lucrative, but it requires a certain discretion. Keisha had grown up in neighborhoods where people spoke in code about their work, where asking too many questions could be dangerous. She recognized the warning in Jin's tone and decided not to push, for now. Where is your grandmother? She asked instead. I thought meeting her was part of this arrangement. She's resting. The treatments make her very tired. Jin's voice softened when he spoke of his grandmother, revealing a tenderness that seemed at odds with his controlled exterior. But she's excited to meet you both. She's been asking about Marcus since I told her about him. You told her about Marcus? I told her I'd found someone special, someone who could bring joy back into this house. Jin's dark eyes met hers, and Keisha felt something shift in her chest, a flutter of awareness that had nothing to do with the job and everything to do with the man standing in front of her. Before she could analyze the feeling, the sound of laughter echoed from upstairs, genuine, delighted laughter that made both adults freeze. It was Kai's voice, bright with joy Keisha suspected he rarely felt. He's never laughed like that, Jin said quietly, his voice filled with wonder and something that might have been gratitude. Marcus has that effect on people, Keisha said, her heart warming at the sound. He sees the good in everyone. Like his mother. The compliment caught her off guard, and Keisha felt heat rise in her cheeks. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know enough. Jin stepped closer, and Keisha caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her pulse quicken. I know you work 3 jobs to give your son opportunities you never had. I know you saved for months to buy him a birthday cake, and when it was destroyed you didn't scream or demand compensation. You comforted him instead. Anyone would have... No, Jin said firmly. They wouldn't. Most people would have made a scene, demanded their money back, made the child feel worse about something that was already devastating. You protected his feelings over your own anger. That takes strength. Keisha stared at him, unsettled by how clearly he'd seen through to the heart of who she was. You were watching us at the bakery. I was. And I saw something I haven't seen in a very long time. Genuine love, the kind that puts someone else's happiness before your own. Jin's voice dropped lower, more intimate. My son needs that kind of love in his life. And maybe I do too. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and dangerous. Keisha felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack under the intensity of his gaze. This wasn't just about tutoring anymore, and they both knew it. Mr. Kang. Jin, he corrected softly. Please. Jin, she said, testing his name on her tongue. I need to be clear about something. I'm not looking for complications in my life. I have Marcus to think about, and I can't afford to make mistakes. Neither can I, Jin said, but some things are worth the risk. Before Keisha could respond, the boys came thundering down the stairs, Marcus riding on Kai's back in a piggyback race that would have been unthinkable an hour ago. Kai's perfect posture was gone, replaced by the natural awkwardness of a child at play, and his face was bright with happiness. "Mama, Kai has the coolest room ever. He has a whole wall of books and a telescope and everything." Marcus's excitement was infectious, and even Jin smiled at his enthusiasm. "And Marcus knows all the superheroes' real names," Kai added, his formal speech pattern already beginning to loosen under Marcus's influence. "He's going to teach me about them." "That sounds wonderful," Keisha said, her heart swelling at the sight of the two boys together. Maybe this arrangement could work after all. Maybe they could all find something they needed here. But as Jin's eyes met hers over the children's heads, Keisha felt a flutter of something that had nothing to do with tutoring, and everything to do with the dangerous attraction building between them. She was walking into uncharted territory, and for the first time in years, she wasn't sure she wanted to find her way back to safety. A soft voice from the top of the stairs interrupted her thoughts. "Jinna? Are these our guests?" They all looked up to see an elderly Korean woman making her way slowly down the stairs, her movements careful but dignified. She was tiny and elegant, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and warmth. "Halmione," Jin said, moving quickly to help her. "You should be resting." "I've been resting for months," she said with gentle firmness. "I wanted to meet the woman who's brought laughter back to my great-grandson." Keisha felt Jin's sharp intake of breath at the word great-grandson, and she realized that his grandmother had just claimed Marcus as family. The weight of that acceptance, the generosity of it, made her throat tight with emotion. "Mrs. Kang," Keisha said, moving forward with Marcus, "it's an honor to meet you." "Call me Halmione," the elderly woman said, her accent thick but her English clear. "It means grandmother, and you must be Marcus." She smiled at the boy who looked up at her with curious eyes. "Jin tells me you're very brave." "I try to be," Marcus said seriously. "Mama says being brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared." "Your mama is very wise." Halmione's eyes moved to Keisha, studying her with the sharp intelligence of someone who'd lived long enough to see through pretense. "And very beautiful." Keisha felt heat rise in her cheeks as Jin's grandmother continued her assessment. Whatever the elderly woman saw seemed to satisfy her, because she smiled and nodded approvingly. "Come," Halmione said, taking Marcus's hand. "Let me show you the garden. I have been waiting for someone young enough to appreciate the koi pond." As she led the boys away, Keisha found herself alone with Jin again. The air between them crackled with tension and possibility, and she knew that whatever happened next would change everything. "Your grandmother seems lovely," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "She likes you," Jin said. "That's significant." "Why?" Jin was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes unreadable. "Because she's the only family I have left who remembers what it means to love without conditions. If she approves of you, it means she sees something worth protecting." The weight of his words settled between them, heavy with implication. Keisha felt as though she was standing at the edge of a cliff, with safety behind her and the unknown stretching out ahead. "And what do you see?" she asked softly. Jin stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I see someone who could save us all." 2 weeks into their arrangement, Keisha had fallen into a routine that felt dangerously like belonging. Every morning, she and Marcus would arrive at the Kang mansion, where Kai would be waiting by the window, his face lighting up the moment he saw them. The formal little boy was disappearing more each day, replaced by a child who laughed freely and spoke in excited bursts about everything he was learning from Marcus. But it was Jin who occupied her thoughts during the quiet moments. The way he watched her teach the boys, the gentle way he spoke to his grandmother, the moments when his carefully controlled facade would slip and she'd catch glimpses of the man beneath the power. This morning was different, though. Keisha could feel the tension the moment she walked through the front door. Jin was on the phone in his study, his voice low and sharp in rapid Korean. Through the partially open door she could see his posture, rigid with anger or concern. "Mama," Marcus whispered, tugging at her hand. Is Mr. Jin okay? He looks upset. Before Keisha could answer, Kai appeared at the top of the stairs, his face pale and worried. Father's been on the phone since very early, he said, his formal speech pattern returning under stress. The men in suits came again last night. Keisha felt a chill run down her spine. Men in suits, late-night phone calls, the careful way Jin spoke about his business. She'd been willfully blind to the obvious, but she couldn't ignore it anymore. "Why don't you boys go play in the garden?" she suggested, keeping her voice light. "I'll be right there." As the children headed outside, Keisha approached Jin's study. She could hear him more clearly now, his voice hard and commanding in a way that made her stomach clench with unease. When he finally hung up, she knocked softly on the doorframe. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Jin looked up, and for a moment his mask slipped completely. She saw exhaustion, worry, and something that might have been fear before he composed himself again. "Business complications," he said, but his voice was strained. "Jin." Keisha stepped into the study, closing the door behind her. "What kind of business requires men in suits to visit at night? What kind of complications make you look like someone's threatening your family?" He stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing his options, truth or continued deception. Finally, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair, messing the perfect styling. "The kind that could put you and Marcus in danger if you knew too much," he said quietly. "We're already in danger, aren't we?" Keisha's voice was steady, but her heart was racing. "Just by being here, by being associated with you." Jin's silence was answer enough. "I need to know," she said firmly. "I need to know what I'm exposing my son to." "My family controls certain interests in Chicago," Jin said carefully. "Import, export, protection services. We operate in areas where the law is more flexible." "You're talking about the Mafia." It wasn't a question. "I'm talking about survival," Jin said, his voice hardening. "About building something that can't be taken away by people who think they're better than us because of where we came from or what we look like." Keisha felt the room spinning around her. She'd brought her son into the home of a crime boss. She'd let Marcus bond with Jin's son, let herself develop feelings for a man whose business was built on violence and illegal activities. "I have to go," she said, backing toward the door. "I have to take Marcus and—" "Keisha, wait." Jin stood, moving around his desk toward her. "Please, let me explain." "Explain what?" "That you've been lying to us from the beginning. That you've put my son in danger for some sick game." "It's not a game." Jin's voice cracked with emotion. "Do you think I wanted this life? Do you think I chose to be the kind of man mothers warn their children about?" "Then why—" "Because my father was murdered when I was 12, Jin said, the words hitting her like a physical blow. "Because my mother died of grief 6 months later. Because my grandmother raised me in a world where showing weakness gets you killed, and the only way to protect the people you love is to be stronger, more ruthless, more feared than everyone else." Keisha stared at him, seeing the pain he kept buried beneath his controlled exterior. "Jin." "I never wanted Kai to grow up in this world," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I wanted him to have choices I never had. But my grandmother is dying, and there are people who think her death will make our family vulnerable. People who would hurt a child to send a message. Then why bring us here? Why involve us in this? Because when I saw you in that bakery, when I saw how you protected your son's feelings even when your heart was breaking, I realized what Kai was missing." "What I was missing?" Jin stepped closer, his dark eyes intense with emotion. "You brought light into our lives, Keisha. For the first time in years, my son laughs. My grandmother smiles. I remember what it feels like to want something more than just survival." Keisha felt tears burning her eyes. "But it's built on lies." "No," Jin said firmly. "My feelings for you are real. Kai's friendship with Marcus is real. The way you've changed our lives, that's real. Your feelings for me." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Jin's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle despite the calluses she could feel on his palms. "I'm falling in love with you, Keisha. I know I have no right to feel that way. No, I have nothing to offer you but danger and complications, but I can't help it." The confession hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Keisha felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling under the weight of his honesty. "This is insane," she whispered. "I know. You're a criminal. I know. I should take Marcus and run." You should, Jin agreed, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. But I'm hoping you won't. Before she could think, before she could remember all the reasons this was wrong, Keisha found herself rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was desperate and sweet, full of all the longing she'd been trying to deny. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Jin rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Please, let me protect you both." "How can you protect us when you can't even protect yourself? Because now I have something worth fighting for." The sound of children's laughter from the garden broke the spell, reminding them both of what was at stake. Keisha pulled back, her mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course, but Keisha—" Jin caught her hand as she turned to leave. "Whatever you decide, I need you to know that these past 2 weeks have been the happiest of my life." As Keisha walked toward the garden to collect Marcus, her heart felt like it was being torn in two. She could see the boys playing by the koi pond, Kai teaching Marcus the Korean names for different fish, while Halmione watched with a peaceful smile. This felt like family, like home. Like everything she'd ever wanted for herself and her son, but it was also dangerous, built on a foundation of violence and secrets that could destroy them all. As if sensing her turmoil, Marcus looked up and waved. "Mama, come see, Kai's teaching me Korean." "Annyeonghaseyo, Mama," he called out, his pronunciation careful but enthusiastic. Despite everything, Keisha smiled. Her son was happy here, happier than she'd ever seen him. He had a friend, a sense of belonging, opportunities she could never provide on her own. But at what cost? As they prepared to leave that afternoon, Halmione pulled Keisha aside. "You know now," the elderly woman said simply. "Yes." "And you're afraid?" Keisha nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good," Halmione said, surprising her. "Fear keeps us careful. But don't let it keep you from love. I've watched my grandson build walls around his heart for years, telling himself it was for protection. But walls that keep danger out also keep love out. What if I can't protect Marcus in this world?" "What if you can't protect him outside it?" Halmione countered gently. "Jin has enemies, yes, but he also has power, resources, the ability to give your son a future you could never provide alone. And what about love? What about choosing someone because you want to, not because you need to?" Halmione smiled, her eyes twinkling with wisdom and mischief. "Who says you can't have both?" That night, as Keisha tucked Marcus into bed in their tiny apartment, he looked up at her with serious eyes. "Mama, are we going back tomorrow?" "I don't know, baby, maybe not." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Kai's really sad, you know. Before we came, I mean. He told me he used to pretend his toys were friends because he didn't have any real ones." Keisha's heart clenched. "I know, sweetheart. And Mr. Jin gets this look sometimes, like he's remembering something that makes him hurt inside, but when you smile at him, the hurt goes away." Out of the mouths of babes. Keisha kissed her son's forehead, her decision crystallizing in her heart. "What would you think if we stayed with them for a while, if we became part of their family?" Marcus's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? We could do that." "Maybe. If you want to." "I want to," Marcus said firmly. "Kai needs us, Mama, and I think maybe you need Mr. Jin too." As Keisha turned off the lights, she realized her 7-year-old son had seen what she'd been afraid to acknowledge. They all needed each other. The question was whether love would be enough to overcome the dangers that came with Jin's world. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Jin's name appeared on the screen, and her heart skipped as she read his words. "Whatever you decide, know that you and Marcus will always be safe. I give you my word." Another message followed immediately. "But I hope you'll give us a chance. Give me a chance to prove that some things are worth the risk." Keisha stared at the messages for a long time before typing back, "We'll be there tomorrow. But we need to talk about how this is going to work." His response was immediate. "Anything you need, thank you for not giving up on us." As Keisha fell asleep that night, she wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or the best decision she'd ever made. Only time would tell, but for the first time in years, she was choosing hope over fear. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The crisis came 3 days later, just as Keisha was beginning to believe they might actually make this unconventional family work. She was in the kitchen with Halmione, learning to make kimchi while the boys played upstairs, when Jin burst through the front door with an urgency that made her blood run cold. "We need to leave. Now," he said, his face grim. "Pack only what's essential." "What's happening?" Keisha asked, but she was already moving, her protective instincts kicking in. "The Volkov family is making a move. They think my grandmother's illness makes us vulnerable, and they're not wrong." Jin's voice was tight with controlled fury. "They've been watching the house, taking photos. They know about you and Marcus." Keisha's heart stopped. "They know about Marcus." "I'm sorry," Jin said, and she could see the self-recrimination in his eyes. "I thought I could protect you both, but—" "Where are we going?" Keisha interrupted, forcing herself to focus on action rather than panic. "Safe house outside the city. My grandmother is already there with Kai." "What about Marcus? He's upstairs." "I'll get him," Jin said, already heading for the stairs. "Pack light. We leave in 5 minutes." As Keisha threw essentials into a bag, her mind raced with fear and regret. She'd known this was dangerous, had felt it in her bones from the beginning, but she'd let herself hope, let herself believe that love could somehow make them all safe. "Mama?" Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face pale but calm. Jin stood behind him, his hand protective on the boy's shoulder. "We're going on a trip, baby," Keisha said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Like an adventure." "Are we in danger?" Marcus asked, his young voice far too knowing. Keisha looked at Jin, who nodded slightly. They'd agreed to be honest with the children, age-appropriately. "Some bad people want to hurt Mr. Jin's family," she said carefully. "So we're going somewhere safe until the police can stop them." "Are we Mr. Jin's family now?" Marcus asked. The question hung in the air, loaded with implications and hope and fear. Jin's eyes met Keisha's over Marcus's head, and she saw her own emotions reflected there: love, terror, desperate determination. "Yes," Jin said firmly, "you are, and I protect my family." The drive to the safe house was tense and silent. Jin drove while speaking rapidly in Korean on his phone, coordinating with his security team. Keisha held Marcus close, watching the city disappear behind them and wondering if they'd ever be able to go home again. The safe house turned out to be a sprawling ranch in rural Illinois, surrounded by woods and protected by men who nodded respectfully to Jin, but kept their weapons visible. Keisha felt like she was living in a movie, except the fear was real, and the stakes were her son's life. Inside, they found Halmione sitting calmly in the living room with Kai, both of them reading books as if armed guards and midnight escapes were perfectly normal. "Halmione," Jin said, relief evident in his voice. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Jinna, but you look terrible." The elderly woman's eyes moved to Keisha and Marcus. "Come, sit. You must be frightened." "I'm not scared," Marcus said, though his voice was small. "Mr. Jin said he'd protect us. And he will," Halmione said with absolute certainty. "My grandson has never failed to protect his family." "But what if?" Keisha began. "No what-ifs," Halmione interrupted gently. "In this life we can only control our choices, not their consequences. Jin chose to love you. You chose to love him back. Everything else is just details." "Love?" Keisha's voice was barely a whisper. Halmione smiled knowingly. "Did you think it was a secret? The way you look at each other, the way you've both changed since you came into our lives. Love isn't something you can hide, dear one." That night, as the children slept in the secure bedroom, Keisha found Jin standing on the back porch, staring out into the darkness. The weight of the day, of everything that had led them to this moment, settled between them. "I'm sorry," he said without turning around. "I should never have involved you in this." "You didn't involve me," Keisha said, moving to stand beside him. "I chose to stay. I chose this." "Why?" Jin's voice was raw with emotion. "Why would you choose this chaos, this danger?" Keisha was quiet for a moment, thinking about everything that had brought them to this point, the destroyed birthday cake that had started it all, the way Kai had laughed for the first time in years, the feeling of belonging she'd found in Jin's arms. "Because Marcus has never been happier," she said finally, "because Kai needed a friend, and you needed someone to remind you that you're more than just your father's legacy. Because your grandmother needed to see her family complete before she—" Keisha's voice broke slightly. Before she dies, Jin finished quietly. And because I love you, Keisha said, the words coming out in a rush. I love your strength and your vulnerability. I love the way you protect the people you care about. I love that you saw my son's broken heart and moved heaven and earth to fix it. Jin turned to face her, his dark eyes bright with unshed tears. I love you too, he said. More than I ever thought possible. More than is probably safe for either of us. Then we'll figure it out, Keisha said, reaching up to touch his face. Together. Jin caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. The Volkovs won't stop. As long as they see you and Marcus as leverage against me. Then we make sure they don't see us as leverage, Keisha interrupted. We make sure they see us as family, as people under your protection who will be avenged if anything happens to them. That's not how this world works, Keisha. Women and children are always targets. Not if the woman refuses to be a victim, Keisha said firmly. Not if she stands beside her man instead of behind him. Jin stared at her, something shifting in his expression. What are you saying? I'm saying marry me, Keisha said, her heart pounding with the audacity of it. Make it official. Make it clear that Marcus and I aren't just people you're protecting. We're your family, your wife and son. And in your world, that means something different than just girlfriend and her kid, doesn't it? Keisha. Jin's voice was filled with wonder and terror in equal measure. I know it's crazy. I know it's fast. But nothing about this has been normal from the beginning. Keisha stepped closer, her hands fisting in his shirt. I love you, Jin Kang. I love your son. I love your grandmother. I want to be part of this family, dangers and all. You could die, Jin said desperately. Marcus could. We could die crossing the street, Keisha countered. We could die in a car accident or from cancer or a dozen other things that have nothing to do with your business. But we die having lived, having loved, having been part of something bigger than just surviving. Jin was quiet for a long moment, his hands coming up to frame her face. Are you sure? Once we do this, where there's no going back, you'll be mine and I'll be yours and the whole world will know it. I'm sure, Keisha said without hesitation, but I have one condition. Anything. When this is over, when the Volkovs are dealt with, we find a way to make your business legitimate. I won't raise Marcus in a world where violence is the first solution to every problem. Jin's smile was soft and full of promise. I've been working on that for years. Having a family just gives me more motivation to finish the job. Then yes, Keisha said, rising on her toes to kiss him. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll be your wife and Kai's stepmother, and whatever else this crazy life requires. The kiss was deep and desperate, full of love and fear and hope, for a future that seemed impossible but felt inevitable. When they broke apart, Jin rested his forehead against hers. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. I bought it the day after you agreed to stay, but I was waiting for the right moment. He pulled out a small velvet box, and Keisha's breath caught. Inside was the most beautiful ring she'd ever seen, a perfect diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the moonlight and threw it back in brilliant flashes. It belonged to my mother, Jin said as he slipped it onto her finger. Halmione said she'd want you to have it. Jin, Keisha whispered, staring at the ring through tears. It's perfect. You're perfect, he said, pulling her close. You and Marcus both. You saved us, Keisha. You saved my son from a life without joy, my grandmother from dying without seeing our family complete, and me from becoming the kind of man I swore I'd never be. We saved each other, Keisha corrected, melting into his embrace. From inside the house they could hear the sound of children's laughter. Marcus and Kai, probably staying up past their bedtime, bonding over shared adventure and the security of being protected by adults who loved them. Listen to that, Jin said softly. That's the sound of family. That's the sound of home, Keisha agreed. 2 weeks later, the Volkov threat was neutralized through a combination of strategic alliances, legal maneuvering, and the kind of decisive action that reminded everyone why the Kang family had survived and thrived for generations. Jin kept the details from Keisha, but she could see the relief in his eyes when he told her it was over. They were married in Halmione's garden on a perfect spring day, with Marcus as ring-bearer and Kai as best man. The ceremony was small, just family and a few trusted friends, but it felt like the most important moment of Keisha's life. As Jin slipped the wedding band onto her finger, he whispered words in Korean that made Halmione cry happy tears. "What did you say?" Keisha asked later. "I promised to love you until my last breath and beyond," Jin said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I promised that our children would know what it means to be loved without conditions." "Our children?" Keisha's heart skipped. "Marcus is my son now," Jin said firmly, "and Kai is yours. And maybe someday, if we're blessed, there will be others." That night, as they celebrated with cake and laughter, and the kind of joy that comes from surviving something that could have destroyed them, Keisha looked around at her new family and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. Marcus and Kai were inseparable now, true brothers in every way that mattered. Halmione was growing stronger every day, her will to live renewed by the happiness surrounding her. And Jin, her husband, looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd never dared to pray. "No regrets?" Jin asked, as they slow danced to music only they could hear. "None," Keisha said without hesitation. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Even though I'm a criminal," he teased, echoing her words from weeks ago. "You're my criminal," she said, making him laugh. "Besides, you promised to go legitimate, remember? Already in progress," Jin assured her. "I want our children to be proud of their father's legacy, not ashamed of it." As the evening wound down and the children finally fell asleep, exhausted by excitement and sugar, Keisha found herself standing in the kitchen where this had all begun. The place where she'd learned to make kimchi, where she'd first felt like she belonged somewhere. Jin came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "A birthday cake," Keisha said, leaning back against his warmth. How something so small, so seemingly insignificant, could change everything. "It wasn't the cake," Jin said softly. "It was you. Your strength, your love, your refusal to let life break your spirit or your son's. That's what changed everything." "For all of us," Keisha agreed. Outside, Chicago glittered in the distance, full of possibilities and new beginnings. Inside, their family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected and home. It had started with a destroyed birthday cake and a stranger's unexpected kindness. It had grown into something neither of them could have imagined, a love story built on second chances, chosen family, and the belief that sometimes the most beautiful things come from the most broken places. And as Jin whispered, "I love you," against her ear, Keisha knew that this was just the beginning of their story. The best was yet to come. Years had passed since that fateful day in the bakery, and the Kang family had grown in ways that still amazed Keisha. The mansion in Lincoln Park had been transformed from a fortress into a home, filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the warmth of unconditional love. Marcus, now 12, was fluent in Korean and excelling in the private school Jin had enrolled him in. He still had the same generous heart that had drawn Kai out of his shell, but now it was paired with the confidence that came from knowing he was loved and protected. Kai, also 12, had blossomed into a happy, well-adjusted child who bore little resemblance to the formal, lonely boy Keisha had first met. He called her Ioma now, mother in Korean, and the title never failed to make her heart swell with pride and love. The biggest change, though, was the newest addition to their family. 2-year-old Grace Kang was a perfect blend of her parents, with Jin's dark hair and Keisha's warm brown eyes. She toddled through the house like she owned it, equally comfortable being spoiled by her big brothers or cuddled by her Halmione, who had defied all medical predictions and was still very much alive and thriving. "She's going to be trouble," Jin said, watching Grace attempt to climb onto the kitchen counter to reach the cookie jar. "She gets that from her father," Keisha replied, scooping up their daughter before she could succeed in her mission. "I was never trouble," Jin protested, but his eyes were dancing with mischief. "The man who once bought an entire bakery just to ensure our daughter's first birthday cake was perfect was never trouble." Keisha raised an eyebrow. "That was a sound business investment," Jin said with mock seriousness. "Sweet Dreams Bakery is very profitable now." It was true. Jin had kept his promise to go legitimate, transforming his family's operations into a network of legal businesses that employed hundreds of people and gave back to the community. The bakery where their story had begun was just one of many enterprises that bore the Kang name with pride rather than fear. "Mama," Appa, Marcus called from the living room. Halmione wants everyone for family picture time. They found Halmione in her favorite chair, directing the chaos with the authority of a general and the love of a grandmother who had lived to see her greatest wish fulfilled. At 93, she was still sharp as a tack and twice as stubborn. "Come, come," she said, gesturing for everyone to gather around her. "Grace, come to Halmione." Their daughter immediately abandoned her parents for her great-grandmother's arms, chattering in a mixture of English and Korean that only the family could understand. "She said the cookies are hiding," Kai translated with a grin, "and that Halmione should help her find them." "Smart girl," Halmione said approvingly. "She knows who really runs this house." As they arranged themselves for the photo, Jin and Keisha on either side of Halmione's chair, the boys flanking them, and Grace perched happily on her great-grandmother's lap, Keisha felt the familiar swell of gratitude that had become her constant companion. "Everyone say sarang," the photographer instructed, using the Korean word for love. "Sarang," they chorused, and the camera captured a moment of pure joy. Later that evening, after the children were in bed, and Halmione had retired with her evening tea and Korean dramas, Jin and Keisha sat together on the back porch where they'd first declared their love for each other. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if that employee hadn't dropped Marcus's cake?" Keisha asked, curled against Jin's side. "Every day," Jin admitted. "But then I remember that it wasn't really about the cake. It was about finding each other when we both needed saving." "You saved us," Keisha said softly. "We saved each other," Jin corrected, echoing her words from that night years ago. "You gave me a reason to be better than my father's son. Marcus gave Kai a brother. Grace gave us all hope for the future. And Halmione, she gave us her blessing and her wisdom. And her recipes," Keisha added with a laugh. "Don't forget the kimchi lessons." "How could I forget? You nearly burned down the kitchen the first time." "That was not my fault, you distracted me." "I kissed you," Jin said, his voice warm with the memory. "Best distraction I ever created." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights of Chicago twinkle in the distance. The city that had once seemed so vast and unforgiving now felt like home, full of possibilities and dreams realized. "Jin?" Keisha said eventually. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing something worth saving in a broke single mother and her son, for giving us a family, for proving that love really can conquer everything." Jin turned to face her, his dark eyes serious and full of the love that had sustained them through every challenge. "Thank you for taking a chance on a man who didn't deserve you, for loving my son like your own, for giving me grace and showing me what it means to build something beautiful instead of just surviving." "I love you, Jin Kang," Keisha said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she'd spoken them. "I love you too, Keisha Kang," he replied, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted like forever. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved beyond measure. Halmione dozed in her chair, a peaceful smile on her face as she dreamed of the family she had helped to create. And in the kitchen, a fresh batch of Grace's favorite cookies sat cooling on the counter, ready for tomorrow's adventures. It had all started with a cancelled birthday cake and a stranger's unexpected kindness. But it had become something neither of them could have imagined, a love story that proved that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones you choose, and that the greatest gifts often come disguised as disasters. The Kang family had found their happily ever after,